Brilliant. So Andrea, thank you for joining.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, we discussed alert level 3, working from home. Navigating, going back to work even, from working from home. So today, obviously, we've found out that there's 2 new confirmed cases, 1 probable case. So we're in quite a good position from where we were anyway, and ready to sort of move into level 3. So I guess the talk is pretty much on us making that move, us getting ready to make that move, and sort of going back into life as normal, or at least a stage of life becoming normal again.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, and I think some people are really ready for that and quite itchy at getting back to sort of a sense of work as usual, and others are not, and there is quite a range. And I think too, for different businesses, that looks quite different. You know, the ones that are in those sort of construction infrastructure projects, which are really, you know, all go next week, that's really different than some of the small businesses who simply can't open. So I think it will be quite interesting to see how people manage what in their head is normal and what is just everyday, compared to, you know, their next door neighbour. And the presumptions that we make about everybody's new normal.
Yeah, I've seen quite a lot of things online about small businesses and about them sort of really wanting to open, and how different their life is to, say, the office workers and the work from home groups of people. They're just polar opposites.
Oh, very much so. And, you know, some are able to be, you know, setting up online and working through contactless service, and others just aren't. I know that there's still quite a lot of lobbying from business groups to government to try and say, well, look, if small businesses can introduce those sorts of one in, one out models, can we start getting them actually operating? So for retailers, you know, really giving them an ability to have people in the door. And I think that probably will increasingly come as there's a bit of confidence that actually community transmission doesn't climb again. But you can understand the reluctance, you know, this is our window and we don't want to go backwards from that. Everybody's done such an amazing job to sort of rally and stay at home and do what they could to try not to have this virus spread. It would be heartbreaking to be heading back into a level 4. So you can understand there's quite a conservative approach to dealing with that.
Yeah, I think that's it. But it's also quite worrying because it's all the key workers, it's the workers that are in construction or in manufacturing. They're the ones that are actually quite close to their colleagues, are the first ones to go back. So it is quite worrying in a way that, you know, it's the workplaces that you would expect, that you would expect to be in close contact with. I
think so. And, you know, when you think about the cost, the increasing cost to those businesses, and just the administrative burden, not as in, you know, paperwork, but actually the operational burden of all of the additional steps they're taking to really make sure that they've got a safe workplace, not just in terms of, you know, physical safety, but that their staff feel really comfortable in that environment as well. There is a cost to that, and I don't know that many businesses could really at the moment predict what that looks like and how many of those steps they're going to need to do on a really long-term basis, not just in the next month or 2, you know, but 6 months and 12 months, and actually what that means for the viability of their business. I think that's actually quite a challenging analysis to do. I know we were listening to Rob Fife just recently this past week, and, you know, he's made some really interesting comments about this being just so difficult to try and make assessment and prediction about because of the nature of it. And we are fortunate that we have got this isolation by being in New Zealand, but we also need to just be realistic about the fact that we're still an exporting nation. We want to be out there and being involved in the global community. So we don't want to, you know, isolate ourselves from commerce as well.
Yeah, I mean, what have you heard in the market? Because I know there isn't that much in the media that says about what businesses are doing now to create safe workspaces for their employees.
Yeah, there's quite a range, and I think actually most employers are trying to be really proactive about it, which is good. The first thing from our perspective, and particularly for employees, is that immediate question about, well, hang on, if I'm coming back, how am I going to do my job, and am I going to be paid fully for doing my job? So that's at the forefront actually of most employees' minds. If they've agreed to a reduced rate of pay, actually, is that going to continue, or once I'm back at work, am I going to be paid normally? So there's a question about, well, do I want to come back with risks associated, or can I actually stay at home? So that's the first thing actually. What does returning to work in a level 3 environment look like? For businesses, you know, the first thing first is to actually keep the virus out. So transmission primarily coming through people-to-people contact. So you want to keep as much interaction out of your workplace as you can. So we are looking at all sorts of ways of contact tracing for people, so that if you've got staff coming in, contractors coming in, there's a really clear process and you can track people. For most businesses, they've done a full clean and those kinds of just hygiene type steps and put those things in place around their workplace. So that's just a given, and most people were doing that before we went into lockdown as well. So those things were already sort of in check. Where things start to differ are those separation of people and separation of distance and interaction actually within work. So looking at people working in a bubble and trying to limit that bubble. So if one person gets isolated and unwell, your whole business doesn't shut down. You can actually have another team just keep working. Looking at staggering shifts, staggering break time, so that you're reducing the interaction between people. How do we get people to and from work? So, you know, where you've got work crews that would normally just jump 3 in the front of a flatbed truck, well, that's not going to work anymore. You're going to have 1, you know, potentially 2 in there, depending on the size of that vehicle. So things like that, those really practical things, most businesses are actually starting to work through, which is good. For your office type environment, most are staying at home, and look, that's just a sensible way to go. Just keep working remotely until we just keep those levels right down.
What happens if you're in a situation where you don't want to go back to work? If you're not ready, just say you look after somebody in the high risk category, or you just don't want to, just in case you catch it yourself. And I think those concerns are real. You know, we've got to be realistic that actually people's stress levels are high still, and you know, when we look at how people respond to stress, not everybody responds in the same way. I think for those vulnerable workers, you know, there are some that really want to get back at work. Yeah. And, you know, particularly in that 70+ camp, and many are still, you know, owner operators in small business. So for them to be said, well, you're vulnerable and you're old and you've got to stay away and we're just going to run your business, you know, that's quite a lot to take in. So you can understand the reluctance. And I guess there it's about saying, well, are we actually able to isolate you at work? Because if we can't actually have you in your own bubble, essentially working, you know, in your bubble, not interacting with anyone else, not having contact with other people, unless we can do that, you have to stay at home. You know, that's the expectation of the government and the Ministry of Health. A little bit different where you've got people at home and somebody who's at work who's responsible or within their bubble. And I think in those circumstances, for the most part, it does need to have that first conversation between an employer and an employee about what that looks like and what their fears are. So an employer can say, well, here's the things that we're doing and we're really comfortable that that's best practice. And is there anything else? You know, having just a general discussion about anything else that that employee might need to feel more comfortable in that space of returning to work, and what they might do then when they get home. So, you know, for hospital staff and things, you know, none of that equipment goes anywhere beyond the hospital. You know, they have a shower there and most of them showering at home before they come in, and actually there's quite a clear delineation between work and home. And in the event that they are still not comfortable with that, then you're really trying to encourage employers and employees to come to arrangement about actually what that looks like for their pay. Because if they are getting subsidised through the government's wage subsidy, then you could argue that that just continues, so at least they've got an income. And anything over and above that,
actually if the person's just not comfortable working, but they are actually able to work and the employer's taking all reasonably practicable steps, there's a real question about, well, an employer probably shouldn't wear the burden of that. And so are you in a position where you're asking for leave, in which case there might be an ability to pay out some annual leave or to take annual leave. So it will look a bit different for each business, and the ability for different businesses to accommodate over and above entitlements at the moment really does shift as well. And so we've just got to be realistic. But I think that starting discussion about where those fears actually sit and what that looks like is the first port. And if they have been able to work remotely, there's a fair question about why can't that continue. So, you know, that would be the best. That would be the best outcome.
I think that would be a really interesting conversation in the future now when people start to ask to work from home and it being stopped by an employer, because we've had so many situations in the past where people want to work remotely and the employer isn't very happy about it. Having those conversations after COVID-19 and we're all out of lockdown is going to be interesting.
I mean, I find that really fascinating, and coming from a profession which is traditionally quite conservative in terms of flexibility, and you know, our model is quite different than most law firms. So, you know, we do have quite a lot of flexibility for our staff, and we fundamentally say, well, in an employment relationship, you've got a relationship of trust and confidence. So why is it that you suddenly don't trust somebody to work at home? You know, how is that actually the starting point for your conversation? And then it's about, okay, how do we make sure that that person is still connected, is still actually able to fulfill their job at home? What else do we need to do? And is it appropriate from, you know, confidentiality and commercial sensitivity aspects, things like that? What else do we need to provide and offer? But also, you know, are they able to be as productive? Those are legitimate questions.
Yeah.
But if you can answer them, there's really a question about, well, what are you trying to prevent? And it's quite common overseas, you know, that people have a couple of days working from home because it saves hours in a commute. And so, you know, realistically, it is quite productive. That productive time for somebody being at home, that's fantastic. So I think that we will start to see, and I would hope that we would start to see more businesses actually see that it can be done if you actually just give some thought to it, and start from a place of trusting the people that you brought into your business. That to me is a no-brainer.
I think that's it, because I think a lot of the time it used to be about being professional and keeping that professional look, but I've been on so many Zoom calls where you can hear the children in the background, and I actually think it's a bit of a breath of fresh air to actually remind ourselves that people have lives and they're getting on with their lives alongside work. It's actually really...
I think so. And I think, again, you know, you go back to what those traditional and quite conservative old school models of working looked like. And there was a real separation of, you know, people's work identity and their home identity, and that these weren't supposed to cross. But actually, we're all just doing our best. And, you know, I think that there is a degree of, actually, are you able to focus on the job? That's totally fair enough. But to suggest that you need to be a different person in and outside of work, I just think that that's actually quite an antiquated concept now. And so surely this will help people move beyond that. And, you know, if we're able to be doing court hearings, and we are through video conferencing and means like that, it can be done. And actually, we should be exploring some of those things, because for our profession, access to justice issues, we shouldn't be letting anything get in the way of that. So, you know, we should be able to be proactive. And for many businesses, you know, if you can find, if there's a will, there's a way. And so I think actually one of the other things about people working in this kind of way is that collaboration of a whole lot of businesses who are really trying to figure out how they can help each other as well. Learn from each other, whether it's a, you know, it's a learning, whether it's an understanding about what's going on, whether it's, you know, new ways of doing things or best practice that people are trying. I think there's some real merit in that. Equally, you know, we saw right at the start of the lockdown, you had a number of businesses who just said, look, I've got 15 people out of a job, and the supermarkets picked them up for all of their late night shelf stocking. So just some really sensible, here's what's going on, let's put them there. And, you know, we had transport issues in terms of that early lockdown, or how do we get things, we're actually not able to stock the shelves because we can't get the distribution happening fast enough. And so some of the construction companies stepped in with their drivers and picked things up for them, you know. So actually some of that collaboration is really interesting too. So I think we will see different ways of doing things, and that's always good. You know, unfortunately it's come from pretty challenging circumstances, but we can make the most of it. That's a good thing.
I think that's it. I think with every sort of, I guess, global pandemic or any kind of issue, usually it makes us think of things in a different way, and we adapt, and it's a great way of looking at what we're capable of. It just,
oh, absolutely.
Just takes a global pandemic. In terms of feeling people now, because we're sort of coming out of, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're coming out of COVID-19, but there's only a certain amount of time before we start hitting winter, and then we hit flu. There's been loads of, you know, not to go into what the press has been saying about vaccines or anything like that, but obviously with people now going back and us being in contact with other people, there's a chance that we could start getting ill again, but not COVID-19, it could be flu. What do you think is going to happen with businesses going forward with getting ill and sick pay and all of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really legitimate concern for employers and employees. You know, if I'm an employee and the person next to me comes into work with a cold, I don't want to be around them. And that's fair enough. You know, why would you in the current environment? So I think that that ability to say, actually, where have you been in the past 14 days? If you're absolutely not, you know, tip-top shape, don't come to work. And we actually incentivize that. That's really important, because if an employee thinks actually my pay is going to be docked and I don't have any sick leave left, then of course there's going to be a challenge in them saying, well, yeah, I'll be fine. And they might not be, and they might be. But at this point, you know, I think it's fair that we take a really conservative view about it. So I think what you'll see employers doing is potentially extending sick leave in advance, in the event that people have run out of a sick leave entitlement. So the starting point here being after 6 months service, then you get 5 days sick leave entitlement for each year. And you can build that up so that you can take up to 20 days in any 1 year. So if you're, you know, a new employee and you haven't been there that long, you might not have your 5 days yet, or you might have used something up. So I think that we'll see employers being asked to extend leave entitlement early, or to be using other means of actually paying people if they're sick, or just saying, well, can we do the job from home? So I would hope that they're taking those steps.
I hope so, because that's the big thing, I think, is that normally people would just try and muddle through and come into work when they're not feeling 100%. Exactly. But how many times do you just push through because you think, well, I'll be better in a few days' time anyway, and I can't afford to lose those days. So it'll be great if employers do. But then, of course, it's another hit on the employers as well.
And that's why I think actually, if you can look at it in terms of just advancing things early, then you know that hopefully balances out, and it is a bit of give and take, that you've got some security of knowing that people who are genuinely not that well stay away, and that the rest of your team around them actually feel comfortable and they're not distracted, you know, throughout the course of the day with somebody coughing next to them. And I think employers too need to be really proactive about that. And the minute that somebody came in and that they were unsure, they send them home. So, you know, at the moment, the social distancing advice around people actually being in at work and there being risk is really that 2 metre rule. And where that gets reduced is a metre between people when that just simply can't be avoided. So you might have a line by line production line. And you're trying even then to get people working side by side rather than face to face. But still, ideally, you would have 2 metres and 15 minutes worth of contact. So that's sort of what we're looking at in terms of, if that's the case, then you're at a high risk. And if somebody does come up with a positive test, then the people who have had that interaction would automatically be isolated from your work site. So you can see actually working in a bubble, if you can isolate that group and have that group working together then you might have this group over here who could keep working in that instance, and these ones get extracted out. But if you've got a business where people work in between all of these, or if you might think about a manufacturing site and you might have an engineer or a supervisor or somebody who's doing maintenance who works between all of these, and that's the person that gets in, well, you can imagine how that filters. So it might be that you can have somebody that's got a bit of a tickly cough that you can isolate in a back room somewhere. Most businesses probably don't have that capability. And if you're having to isolate somebody in a back room, you better to just send them home.
It's true, because they're going to have to walk through the same front door as everybody else at some point anyway. So chances are they will make contact with somebody else.
Yeah, and actually those high contact spots are really what we're expecting employers to be having a really strict, hygiene and cleaning regime around.
Oh, brilliant. The other question, I know we've touched on this when we spoke last time, but one of the things now, and given we've all been away and social distancing in lockdown for the last 4 to 5 weeks, is pregnancy. So I know that obviously, as I say, we've touched on it before, but the conversation around pregnancy and what you do if you've realised that over the last 5 weeks of being in lockdown that you could be pregnant. What do you do in these situations? Is it a chance to talk to your employer? Or I know that there's worries about discrimination after this, and how can an employer make sure that they don't discriminate in this instance as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting area. You know, I expect that our law, unfortunately, will test a whole lot of cases where employers haven't got it right, or employees believe that they haven't got that right, and whether actually the employer's decisions were fair and reasonable, or whether they met their health and safety obligations. There's sort of a few sides to that, because on the one hand, normally you would say, well, an employee doesn't actually have any positive obligation to disclose a pregnancy whatsoever, and that's their personal business, and it shouldn't affect their job at all. On the other hand, if you look at that with the health and safety lens, you would say, well, actually, you've got an obligation to be taking all reasonably practical steps for your own well-being and safety in the workplace, just as an employer does. And so you are now considered to be more vulnerable, and you should really be keeping out of the workplace as long as we're in particular alert levels. So that creates a bit of a conundrum for an employee saying, well, actually, I probably do have now a positive obligation to disclose. And in terms of good faith, actually, there's a proactive obligation to be having a conversation there as well. So even though there might be a fear of an employer not dealing with that well, I would say, you know, if you can, you should really be having the discussion, because you've got to give an employer the actual information from which they can make reasonable decisions as well. So an employee in those circumstances, I'd suggest that they're using the people around them, like their midwife or their doctor, and getting that advice about, well, what do they think is going to be best in terms of working safely. So I can take that to an employer, and it's not just, I've got a problem to leave at your door. And I'm certainly not suggesting that pregnancy is a problem. It's an amazing time and a really exciting time for people. So, but it is about saying, actually, I'm really comfortable with this. These are the people around me who, you know, I trust their judgment, and this is what they've recommended. Are you okay with that? Are you comfortable that this is how we can work safely? So that an employer can go, great, you know, that's really exciting news. And okay, well, let me think about that, and we might not be able to do that, we could do it this way. So you can actually just have a fair conversation. And, you know, here, just the same as most places around the world, you can't discriminate based on pregnancy, based on gender. You know, that is prohibited both in employment and human rights. So we do have steps to say that shouldn't happen, and there are some employers where it will. And unfortunately, that's pretty disappointing. But we've got ways that we can address that, and we can address it pretty quickly. So I think for the most part, I really encourage employers to have an upfront conversation, but do that in a way that they feel, you know, informed about how they can work safely, so that they can give their employer some confidence as well. Because employers might not have even contemplated that this was something that might have happened during that time too. You know, they've got a lot going on as well. So. So help them out, make that an easier conversation for everybody.
I think that's it. It's that it's making sure that the relationship between the employee and employers it becomes stronger, I think, after this, rather than feeling like there's a big divide between the two. Because I know that, you know, people that have got their own businesses have been saying, you know, that the government has helped them out through furlough payments, but it's still the worry of they've still got their supplier overheads and they've still got all the costs going out, whereas employees are worried that they don't really know what they're going to do after the furlough payments and what that means for their business afterwards. I think having those open discussions and those you know, collaborative, honest, open discussions are what businesses need to go forward.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you look at actually how businesses are managing this transition, not every business has had regular catch-ups with their employees. So if they haven't, they really need to start, because it is employees who are going to be your check and balance too on whether actually the way that you're set up to work on return is safe. And it is actually effective. So you need them to come with you and be part of that discussion. And equally, you know, on returning, hey, this is what we're proposing, is there anything else, or do you think that that will be sufficient, or do you think that will work? And because all of those people, they want to work safely as well, you know, they're invested in having a job and contributing to your business. So use their expertise, use their experience to actually say, oh, you know, here's a thought, and there might be a good reason why it might not work. But there might be other aspects which are really valuable to your business, not just in terms of safety, but efficiency as well. So I think having those conversations, checking in with people, making sure that they're actually understanding what you're proposing about returning and how things will work from there, that's a good thing. And then once everybody's back, you know, you've got an obligation to involve employees and workers in how things work safely, not just within your business, but also any other contractors and any others who you engage with regularly at work. So if you've got a multi-party work site, you should be having active conversations with all of those. And it'll be the same, you know, if you're in an office building and you've got 5 or 6 different workplaces within that, or, you know, hundreds in some cases, then actually you should know that there are shared expectations about how everybody interacts within that. You know, I think about some of the office blocks in Auckland and other major centres where you've got a lot of stories, and how are you going to get everybody in and out of the lift? If everybody comes to work at 8:30, 8 o'clock or 9 or whatever your start time looks like, and you're going to try and fill all of those lifts with people when you're asking them also to socially distance, you know, that should be, if that conversation hasn't happened already, that should certainly be starting to happen in terms of changing alert levels and how many people you're actually expecting to be on site and how you manage that. So there's a whole lot of opportunity here again to just have really honest conversations about what might work differently for different businesses, so that you can be on the same page and no one gets a surprise, because that's the last thing that you want, is to sort of come and arrive on something, feel really uncomfortable, you're not quite sure who to talk to on the spot. That's not a good situation for an employee or a tenant.
Yeah, it's true. I think that's it. It's also, but it is also having the confidence to know that those questions can be answered. So it is, I think that's a lot of the time we get worried and we build it up in our own head that we're worried to have those initial conversations, and actually they're not so bad when you actually have them. But I think a lot of the time we hold ourselves back from actually asking the questions that need to be asked.
Yeah, and look, in the event that that you get responses that you're not comfortable with, then I think you know it might reassure you that this is not the place for you, and go and find somewhere where you do think it's a workplace that you want to be a part of and contribute to. So, you know, if you do get let down with what that looks like, well, your questions might be answered. And either you can try and adjust that where you are, or say, well, that's not the place for me, and I'll look somewhere else. So, you know, as much as it is at the moment, we will look at huge numbers of redundancies as a consequence of what's going on right now. There will also be other businesses that are ramping up and are able to pick up in quite different areas and quite different sectors than what have traditionally been going on. So you know, people should be thinking about actually what their transferable skills look like. Because even when we go back to our existing jobs, there'll be aspects of them that we do differently just because we have to, or we've actually started working differently if there's been the ability to work remotely. So I think people can have a bit of confidence to say, actually, we're pretty resilient for the most part. And we can actually rely on ourselves to have those conversations, and to know that we've got some skills that actually are really valuable for an employer.
Yeah, I think that's it. Not to forget that people will still be hiring, and once the businesses start coming back to work, and even the businesses that are trading are now trading, but obviously without contact with customers. But once they start trading again, and their balance sheet starts to, they start getting a better cash flow in, they'll start looking to hire again. It's just at the moment, while we're still in lockdown or alert level 4 and moving into alert level 3, we've just got that transitional period.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing too is, just like employees are stressed, employers are too. They're trying to figure out how to pay the bills and meet, their obligations. And so sometimes as employees, we do think the worst, in the absence of sort of being told something or having something communicated to us, we do jump to the worst conclusion and we fill in the gaps. And that's not always accurate. So I think we need to be really careful that actually we don't make assumptions about what our employer is doing and why. And that's particularly if we think about some of those things around safety or around wages or hours. And if that conversation hasn't been initiated by an employer, it's okay that employees ask the question and say, hey, can you just tell me about what the plan is for when we go back? And those are absolutely questions that are fair for an employee to ask. And an employee might have forgotten that they've just not communicated. They're so busy in their own head trying to get done what they need to do. They've just missed a beat. And I'm not suggesting that that's a good thing, but equally, help them out and give them the opportunity to actually make sure that you are informed. Because if you're asking the question as an employee, chances are others will be asking it as well. So if they can give you all consistent information, that's going to be better for everybody.
I think that's it. We do a lot of the time think that our employers know all the answers and that they're almost self-serving, and it's all just about what they can get out of it. And actually, a lot of the time, it's not like that at all. They're trying to navigate this whole sort of process exactly the same way that we are. And well, I say we as employees, but employees and employers are effectively in the same boat at the moment, because we don't know what's going to happen from one week to the next.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when we look even at the wage subsidy, 2 months this didn't exist. So where you're asking employers about how it's used and if they're using it appropriately and what happens in these circumstances, employers might not know, and some will have access to good advice. But not all of them will even know where to start looking for that. And so I think it's fair that we say, actually, some of these questions are untested. So they're using the best information that they have. But it might be hard for them to actually say definitively, oh, it's X, in an initial conversation. They might have to say, I might have to look into that and I'll come back to you and make sure that they do. But they might not have all the answers right up front. And that's just what this environment looks like.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's also a situation where things are changing. So, we only really knew about furlough, as you say, a month or so ago. And now we're in a situation where who knows what we're going to need in the future in order to keep the economy going. So I guess it's just a watch-based type of situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that too is in terms of how much preparation can be done, for some employers actually understanding what forward-looking orders might actually look like. There's huge questions about that. And that differs across so many sectors, right through from your building, right through to fashion. you know, what does this mean? Are people going to have a disposable income to be making purchases, or are they just going to sort of hunker down? Or actually, if they got quite into online shopping and the business is doing really well out of that, you've just got to be able to get it out the door to actually, you know, give people their new merino jumper or whatever it happens to be. And on this side, actually, are we building houses? You know, do people actually have confidence in the housing market, and does that impact on suppliers and trades in that area? So there are huge questions, and for businesses trying to navigate what does planning look like, that's quite challenging. So both for employers and employees, you know, we're suggesting take a step back, have a look at things in terms of each level, and try and cut it down to timeframes so that you can be saying, right, we're going to catch up in a couple of weeks, but here's our starting thoughts around level 3. Here's our plan around how we work in level 3. And as things, you know, shift or change, make sure that we understand that. We're going to re-induct everybody back when we come back on level 3, so that you all know, just like we would after any big break, we know that's where accidents happen or something's changed. So we'll give everybody the same information at once. So we get everybody back in, and for that first couple of weeks, this is how we're going to work. And so long as we're continuing in level 3, that's how we're going to work. And at level 2, what our plan looks like is working like this. So for now, this is what our plan looks like in terms of wages or hours. And actually socially distancing, we're going to ask this bubble to work on that shift, and then we're going to ask this bubble to work here. And, you know, and actually set it out for people so that they can see it, they understand it, they've got an opportunity to have some input into that. But also they can understand so far as you can what forward looking looks like, and when you're making decisions about that too.
Yeah, I like that, because I think that's actually what the government's done really well. Because if you look at all the different countries and how everyone's trying to navigate this, the one thing that everybody does love about New Zealand is the fact that we've had the 4 levels. We don't know what each level means yet, but we do know when we're moving into a new level, and it just gives us something to plan for, and it's been really helpful, I think.
I think so, and I think that we would expect that as alerts change, unless we go backwards, which might happen quickly, you know, those decisions happen quickly. Actually, if we're moving forward down a level, or, you know, a bit of a level, and there's relaxing to it, you would expect that actually people should have some notice. So just like we did around, you know, the transition from level 4 to level 3, people had this extra time to actually start putting preparatory steps in place. Then I would expect the same thing will happen for other alert changes as well. So that actually you've got time to say, well, what does this look like for our business? And it's not overnight. You're just operating in a new environment, and you haven't had a chance to actually think about what you might need to operate well within that.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's just being able to know that we are moving through levels, that we are getting, you know, closer and closer, hopefully, to level 1. Well, level 2 at least in the next 3 weeks would be great. And moving that way.
And I think that's where, you know, there is there's some really good collaboration between businesses and business groups to actually try and help people understand what that might look like for different sectors, and just get a better understanding of what businesses are going to be up and running and how. And that, you know, some businesses, it's just far more challenging than others. You know, those in the dental profession, for example, and the additional protection that they're taking. So at the moment, they're really working only on emergency cases. But the hygiene and the cleaning standards that they are putting in place for that is, it's really impressive, to be honest, the ones that are actually operating in that environment. And some are choosing not to open at all into level 3 because of those additional expectations, and saying, actually, we just don't want to take the risk, and we're quite comfortable that, you know, we can do this well in this point, but we're not going to be working in that. And they might have the flexibility to be able to have a bit of give in their system. But there are some really great things that we can learn about how they've set that up and what they've done, and how they've planned for that, even down to little things like who's actually able to provide PPE and where that stock is coming from. So some of the chambers have been really good at coordinating different work groups, And some people have just got their own networks, but for others, you know, they're new in business or just establishing themselves, or, you know, having moved from a different region, they just might not have access to that. And I think that's where people having this period of isolation can be really isolated. And that's a bit of a worry too, if they're not actually able to see what else other people are doing, learn from it. It might be right for them or it might not be, but it helps them make some good decisions because they're better informed. So I've got a bit of a concern about some of those kinds of businesses and being able to have them up and going well.
Yeah, it's really tough actually, and I think that's it, is it? It's almost for them to try and make connections with people that that have been in the region for, you know, for a long time, and actually know and be able to make those connections now while they're in lockdown, so that once they are out of lockdown, they, or even now, they're not as isolated. But it is really tricky. But I think everybody's really open. That's the one thing I found moving to New Zealand, is that everyone's open, everyone's willing to help each other out. And I think that's actually it's that attitude that is really sort of driving us to get down and get rid of coronavirus, because everybody's there to help each other out and, you know, do each other's shopping and make sure that everybody else is okay.
Yeah, that's a really Kiwi thing. Yeah.
I haven't
think
seen
that
it
sense of community.
Pardon?
That sense of community that does actually translate from, you know, your housing and your local community into business. I think actually that's something that is quite special. I suppose the other thing too, from our communication point of view, is just thinking about actually for employees, you know, we're using Zoom and Teams, and, you know, people are FaceTiming and using WhatsApp and all of those other, you know, great pieces of technology that we've got to be able to interact with people. But actually, because we've got that sense of social isolation, being online, it's actually it's quite tiring. And if the people are not used to that, they're not used to engaging a lot during the course of their day, that will actually be quite a lot. So I think we just have to be aware too that there will be different fatigue and stress triggers for different people. So some people will find that really confronting, you know, and I think that we just need to be a bit realistic about some of those things that we have to manage in a slightly different way for different people. And that they actually prefer to just pick up the phone just like they used to, or they might prefer to send an email, and that's okay too, you know, just because we have this facility available. And it's great for missing having to, you know, sort travel or actual interaction, but might not be appropriate for everyone all the time. And it does come with other challenges around just people's stress levels and their fatigue, and it's one of those new things that we'll have to monitor and manage as we learn to work a little bit differently.
It's very true. I think it's also knowing that our colleagues and our business, you know, everyone else in the business is going to act very differently as well, because it will also be sort of emotionally draining for everybody. So everyone going back into routine, some people are going to be able to deal with it better than others. I think that's another thing that people need to really think about, is if your colleague is feeling low, or, you know, one of your team members isn't, you know, their usual self, it's just checking in with them and making sure they're okay, because everyone's going to start dealing with this in a very different way and at different times as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that that conversation about making sure actually we don't get work-life creep is really important. You know, years ago, I made some comments about actually, you know, while technology is great, we shouldn't be expecting people to be online and accessible all the time. And while some people prefer to work late or work early, actually the reality of that, you shouldn't be sending emails at 11 o'clock at night expecting that people might respond to them at the start of the day. And if you are sending them that late at night, is that really actually a productive way to work or not? So that looks different for different people. And an employee who has a superior that's sending them something at 11 o'clock at night might start thinking, well, am I supposed to be up at 11 at night, or, you know, up at 5 in the morning to be able to have that ready and on their desk before they start? So I was talking about technology which could actually stop emails being transmitted during certain hours, so that people actually couldn't have that arriving on their on their desk. And I think actually we've got a risk in the current environment that work-life creep starts as well. So that is one of the conversations that for most businesses where people are working from home, great, that they can work flexibly. And there is a real need, the reality of those people who have got children working, online in terms of their distance learning for school, and they're trying to navigate supporting that as well as their work. It might be that they choose to push their day around a little bit so that they're doing things early or late, and their break times might look different, but they still actually should only be working their work hours. We don't want them to be just available all hours, and we need to manage that so that we keep them well, even if we can't see them. We know that actually they're not burning the candle.
That's very true, actually. And I think that a lot of people do fall into that trap where they will just check their emails, in the evenings, and then they sort of get pulled in and sucked in to actually do a deliverable. And before you know it, it's you're working during your lifetime. But it's really tricky, that one. It's really,
it is. Really... And again, I think it's just one of those things that, we need to be making sure that we're actively managing before it becomes a problem, because, for so many people, the dining room table has become where they're working, and actually it's still the hub of the home. Everyone piles on in for dinner and for breakfast and whatever else, and actually just suddenly reading an email, and then you're not present there, and you're not present there, and you feel like you're working on hours but you're not getting anything done. That's not healthy either. And so actually knowing that it's okay to put the computer screen down, put the phone down, and have time out, and that is what it means. You actually step away from work and just do something for yourself. You shouldn't be working to 24/7.
No, very true. I feel like we've covered so much ground. It's been brilliant talking to you. For anyone else that watches this and wants to get in touch with you or ask any more questions, what's the best way of getting in touch?
It's probably just either through our website, which is dtilawyers.co.nz, or by email. So I'm Andrea at dtilawyers.co.nz, and we put up quite a lot of information on our website just to try and make sure that people have some really practical starting points to be making decisions, rather than there's a lot of information, and so we're trying to help people have Q&A and actually practical examples of how that applies in different scenarios, so they can look at those and think, okay, cool, that's how leave is worked out, for example, or here's a checklist of things that I need to think about in terms of returning to work at level 3 and transitioning. So we've got quite a few of those resources up there, which will be a starting point, so then you can figure out your plan and then ask the questions and things from there, which is more efficient and also just better because you're able to apply that to your own personal circumstances as an employee or business, and it'll give you a better sense of where you're at.
I think that's it. I think everyone's trying to navigate that. I feel like I've learned so much actually talking to you, because it's just comforting to know what to do. And I think there's so many times when usually, it's business as usual. You know what you're doing. You're never in a situation where you're completely lost and you're about to go back into work. Or if you are, it's not when the entire workforce are going back into work as well at the same time. So
yeah, definitely. And both employees and employers, the starting point is that expectation of good faith. We should be having confidence and trust in each other. We should be talking to each other so that things don't escalate. They can actually be addressed and resolved. Employers have got to be fair and reasonable in the circumstances. Those are just really simple, basic fundamentals of how employment relationships are supposed to work. And then we think about that with a safety lens, which is we all should be taking all reasonably practical steps to keep each other safe and well at work. So what that looks like, those are the guiding principles, and that should be the same for everybody. So, as touchstones of going, does this sit right? Does this feel right? You go back to those and say, well, actually, can I do anything about it? Yes or no? Or do I need to ask some questions to know whether I can do anything about that? And then you can go from there, because I think there's so much for people to take in, and it can be really overwhelming. So to be able to break it down is quite helpful. And I think that's why it's really valuable you doing these sessions for people, because it gives people a starting point of actually helping them order their thoughts and becoming more confident about the things that they can, and more aware and conscious about the things that they've still got questions about. And that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's actually just not know. Sometimes you just don't know the questions that you want to ask. You just, yeah, you know that there's an A and there's a B, but you have no idea how you're going to navigate the journey to get there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And we all have those moments, you know, we're all human. So we're all doing the best that we can. And I think if we can keep doing that and you know, just keep doing what we think is the right thing, we shouldn't get too far wrong.
No, I think that's it. It's knowing that you can ask for help, knowing that you can get help, and that no question is a silly question in this situation. It's just doing the best that we can.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, so thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And and I hope people get in touch with you directly.
Oh, thanks very much, Nikki. I appreciate it.
Take care.